What happens when the lines between reality and illusion shatter? When a game becomes a hunt, and the playground is a prison of mirrors. We are drawn to mysteries, to the intricate dance of shadows and light, truth and deception. Today, we take you to a place where every reflection tells a lie and every corridor leads to a darker truth. It's a story of wealth, revenge, and a labyrinth of deadly elegance. Before we step through the looking glass, if you crave mysteries that chill you to the bone and thrillers that challenge your perception, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single story we have locked away in our vault. Now take a deep breath. The game is about to begin. Welcome to the glass maze. The invitation was an object of cruel beauty, much like the woman who had sent it. It arrived in a slim, obsidian box, devoid of any return address. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single, intricately cut shard of crystal. When held to the light, it didn't just refract the spectrum. It projected a holographic message that shimmered in the air. You are cordially invited to the unveiling of the Elysian Labyrinth, puzzle of my own design. The first to solve it will be rewarded beyond their wildest avarice. The game begins at dusk, on the eve of the solstice. Transport will be provided. Blackwood. For the 12 souls who received it, the invitation was an irresistible lure. They were a curated collection of society's elite, a menagerie of the powerful, the greedy, and the morally bankrupt. There was Senator Alistair Finch, a man whose public persona of integrity was a carefully constructed facade for his insatiable greed. Beside him on the private ferry to Blackwood Isle was Eleanor Vance, a corporate raider known for her ruthless takeovers that left thousands jobless. She saw the world as a series of assets to be liquidated. Then came Julian Croft, a celebrated artist whose fame had been built on stolen ideas, a man terrified of being exposed as a fraud. And among them mingled others of similar ilk. A pharmaceutical CEO who had buried fatal drug trial results, a gossip columnist who had ruined lives with whispers and lies, a venture capitalist who had built his empire on the ruins of others. Each of them was a predator in their own right, drawn by the scent of a prize they felt they deserved. The architect of this grand affair was Seraphina Blackwood, the sole heiress to the Blackwood Fortunia dynasty forged in steel, railways, and whispered scandals that spanned generations. Orphaned as a child under tragic and mysterious circumstances, Seraphina had grown up in gilded isolation on her family's private island. She was a phantom, a rumor in high society. Stories depicted her as a brilliant but disturbed recluse, a woman who preferred the company of intricate clockwork mechanisms and complex mathematical theorems to that of people. Her only public foray was the occasional commissioning of architectural marvels that defied logic and gravity. The Elysian Labyrinth was to be her magnum opus. As the ferry cut through the slate-gray waters, Blackwood Isle emerged from the mist like a jagged tooth. It was a place of dramatic, untamed beauty, with sheer cliffs plummeting into the churning sea and ancient, gnarled trees clinging to its rocky spine. But dominating the island's central plateau was a structure that defied nature itself. It was the glass maze. From a distance, it looked like a frozen explosion, a crystalline palace of impossible angles and glittering facets that drank the fading sunlight and bled it back out in 1,000 dazzling colors. It sprawled over several acres, a multi-tiered labyrinth of walls, bridges, and chambers, all constructed from what appeared to be flawless glass and polished chrome. It was breathtaking, a monument to impossible wealth and boundless imagination. But as the guests drew closer, an undercurrent of unease began to ripple through their excitement. The structure seemed to shift and change with the light, its transparent walls creating a dizzying, disorienting effect. It was a cage of perfect, terrifying beauty. They were greeted at the dock not by their hostess, but by a fleet of silent, autonomous electric carts that whisked them up a winding path to the maze's grand entrance. The air grew cooler, scented with salt and the strange, sterile smell of the glass. 2 monolithic panels of mirrored glass slid silently apart, revealing a grand reception chamber. The floor was polished obsidian, the ceiling at dizzying height, and the walls were the same reflective material, creating an infinite, unnerving gallery of their own images. In the center of the room, on a raised dais, stood Seraphina Blackwood. She was tall and willowy, clad in a gown of shimmering silver that seemed woven from moonlight and liquid mercury. A Venetian mask of polished silver, shaped like a stoic, emotionless face, concealed her features, save for a pair of piercing, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the carefully constructed veneers of her guests. Her voice, when she spoke, was not broadcast through a speaker but seemed to emanate from the very air around Thema Testament to the advanced acoustics of the chamber. "Welcome, esteemed guests," she said, her tone cool and melodic. "You stand at the threshold of the Elysian labyrinth, a place of reflection, in every sense of the word." A low murmur of anticipation rippled through the assembled group. "The rules are simple," Seraphina continued, her masked face slowly panning across her audience. "You have 24 hours to find the heart of the maze. Inside, a single prize awaits a bearer bond valued at $100 million. The maze is complex. It will test your intellect, your courage, and your perception. What you see is not always the truth. Trust your instincts, but do not trust your eyes." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Your personal effects have been taken to private suites. You will enter the maze as you are. Sustenance and water can be found within, should you be clever enough to locate them. Are there any questions?" Senator Finch, ever the self-important orator, stepped forward. "Ms. Blackwood, a fascinating proposition. But what of safety? A structure of this size, one could get lost." Seraphina's head tilted slightly. "The maze is perfectly safe for those who respect its design. It is, after all, just a game." Her eyes seemed to glint behind the mask. "The game begins now. The entrance behind you is now sealed. The only way out is through." With a soft hum, the mirrored panels they had entered through slid shut, the seam disappearing completely. The guests were sealed inside. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, followed by a nervous, competitive energy. They were sharks in a new, unfamiliar tank, and the scent of blood, or in this case, money, was in the water. With shared, greedy glances, they turned and dispersed into the myriad openings that led from the reception chamber into the labyrinth proper. The game was on. The first few hours were a novelty. The guests wandered through corridors of pure, transparent crystal, marveling at the architectural genius. The setting sun painted the maze in hues of orange and violet, creating a spectacle of breathtaking beauty. But as twilight bled into a deep, starless night, the maze transformed. Emergency lighting activated, casting long, eerie shadows and creating confusing, deceptive reflections. The transparent walls became mirrors in the darkness, multiplying corridors and creating phantom figures that seemed to mimic their every move. The beauty became menacing. The first scream cut through the silence of the maze just before midnight. It was shrill and abruptly cut short. The guests, now scattered and isolated, felt a collective jolt of fear. A competitive game had just shown its teeth. It took nearly an hour for two of them, the venture capitalist and the gossip columnist, to navigate their way towards the source of the sound. They found Julian Croft, the artist, in a small hexagonal chamber. He was dead. He lay at the bottom of a shallow, ornamental pool, the water dyed a sickening crimson. At first glance, it seemed he had simply slipped on the wet marble, struck his head, and drowned. A tragic, foolish accident. But as they stared at the body, a detail seemed horribly wrong. A shard of impossibly sharp, broken glass was clutched in his hand, and a deep, precise gash was visible on his neck, poorly concealed by the water. This was no accident. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the avarice-fueled excitement. They were trapped in a massive, disorienting puzzle box with a murderer. And their host was nowhere to be seen. As if on cue, a new sound began to permeate the maze, the rising howl of wind. Outside, a storm of unnatural ferocity was descending upon the island. Rain began to lash against the glass walls, and the distant boom of thunder echoed through the crystalline corridors. The storm had been forecasted, but its speed and violence were unprecedented. It severed any hope of outside communication. No signal could penetrate the tempest. They were utterly, completely alone, or so they thought. Just before the storm had made landfall and rendered the sea impassable, a garbled, frantic emergency call had managed to reach the small, understaffed police department on the nearest mainland town. The dispatcher could only make out a few words amidst the static. Blackwood Isle. Dead. Trapped. Maze of glass. It was enough. Leading the two-man team on the department's aging patrol boat was Detective Miles Corbin. He was a man in his late 50s, with a face that seemed carved from worry and resignation. He'd seen too much in his 30 years on the force, and had moved to the quiet coastal town for a peaceful slide into retirement. With him was Officer Jessica Riley, young, sharp, and technologically adept, a stark contrast to Corbin's old-school, gut instinct methods. They made it to the island's dock just as the sky turned a bruised purple, the waves crashing violently against the pylons. They found the entrance to the maze sealed, just as the guests had. But Riley, with a sophisticated frequency scanner, found a maintenance override signal. With a grinding protest, a small service panel slid open near the base of the structure, barely large enough for them to squeeze through. They entered a narrow, dimly lit maintenance corridor that ran like a vein through the colossal structure. The sound of the storm was a muffled roar outside, but inside, a new sound dominated. The faint, almost subliminal hum of technology, and the chilling, echoing silence of the maze itself. They emerged from the service corridor into one of the main passages, the reflective walls immediately assaulting their senses. "What is this place?" Riley whispered, her voice tight with awe and apprehension. Corbin didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on his own reflection, and the countless versions of himself staring back from every angle. He could feel it in his bones, the same cold premonition he got at every complex crime scene. This was not just a place. It was a weapon. His eyes scanned the floor, and he saw them. Faint, scuffed footprints, and a single dark droplet that he knew instinctively wasn't water. He followed the trail with his eyes, through a bewildering series of turns and intersections, his mind already working to unravel the impossible geometry of the space. They were now inside. The storm raged, sealing them in with the killer and their prey. From a hidden control room, nestled deep within the island's bedrock, Serafina Blackwood watched on a mosaic of monitors, her masked face betraying no emotion. The pieces were on the board. The true game had just begun. The police had arrived, not as rescuers, but as new players in her twisted, crystalline theater. And she watched their reflections dance, just like all the others, in her gilded cage. The Elysian labyrinth was a forensic nightmare. Every surface was pristine, non-porous glass, wiped clean by a sophisticated, near-silent automated system that Corbin and Riley had heard but not yet seen. Fingerprints were a fleeting hope. DNA evidence was a ghost. When they finally located Julian Croft's body, the hexagonal chamber had already been subtly altered. A section of the wall had rotated, changing the layout, and a gentle filtration system was already working on the crimson-tainted water of the pool. The scene was actively erasing itself. "It's like it's alive," Riley murmured, her tablet struggling to map the area. The maze's internal schematics were a chaotic, shifting algorithm. The architecture isn't static. Walls move, corridors realign on what seems to be a timed, random sequence. "Not random," Corbin countered, his voice a low growl. He knelt by the pool, careful not to disturb the body further. "Nothing about this is random. She designed it this way. Maximum confusion. No chance to get your bearings." He pointed a gloved finger towards a high, recessed corner of the chamber. "And no blind spots." A tiny, almost invisible lens was embedded in the chrome fixture. "We're being watched. Every second." The surviving guests, whom they eventually managed to gather, were a terrified, paranoid flock. The initial arrogance had evaporated, replaced by raw, primal fear. They were huddled in a slightly wider atrium, the transparent walls around them showing the storm raging outside, lightning flashes illuminating their pale, frightened faces. Senator Finch immediately tried to take charge, his booming voice echoing unnaturally in the glass space. "Thank God, officers. You must get us out of here. This is an outrage. A mad woman has trapped us." Eleanor Vance, the CEO, was colder, more calculating. "Forget getting out. Find her. The bond is irrelevant now. This is about survival." She eyed the other guests, her gaze lingering on each of them, suspicion radiating from her like a palpable chill. One of us could be working with her. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The seeds of mistrust, so carefully planted by Serafina, had taken root. Corbin watched them, his detective's mind cataloging their reactions. They were all liars and manipulators in their own worlds. Here, those skills were being turned against each other. "Everyone stay put," Corbin commanded, his voice cutting through the rising hysteria. "Riley, get statements from each of them. Find out who saw Croft last. I'm going to try and understand the layout of this madhouse." But understanding the maze was like trying to chart the surface of the ocean. Corridors that led one way would, upon returning, lead somewhere else. Staircases seemed to ascend to nowhere, ending in a solid glass ceiling. Optical illusions were rampant. A seemingly long hallway would turn out to be a short alcove with a perfectly placed mirror at the end. It was psychological warfare waged with light and glass. And then the voice came. Serafina's calm, melodic tone filled the air, seemingly coming from all directions at once. "The game has evolved. It seems we have a fallen player. Pity. Mr. Croft lacked imagination." The guests flinched as if struck. "Do not despair," the voice continued, a chilling amusement coloring its edges. "There are still prizes to be won. For instance, the next clue to the labyrinth's heart is hidden in the place where Senator Finch signed away public lands to a private drilling corporation. A dirty little secret, wasn't it, Alistair?" Finch went white as a sheet. Every head turned towards him, a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension on their faces. "What is she talking about?" Riley asked Corbin under her breath. "Motive," Corbin breathed, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't about a prize. It's a reckoning." The game had changed. Serafina began to use the maze as her stage, revealing the sins of her guests one by one. She would project documents onto the glass walls, incriminating emails, forged signatures, buried reports. With each revelation, she sowed more discord, turning her captives against each other, exposing the rot beneath their polished exteriors. Eleanor Vance's history of insider trading flashed across a bridge of glass. The pharmaceutical CEO was forced to watch a looping video of a victim from his falsified drug trials. The maze had become a hall of judgment. And the accidents continued. The next to die was the gossip columnist, a woman named Beatrice. She was found in a chamber known as the Echo Hall, where whispers were amplified 1,000 times. She had been lured there by a promise of a big scoop, whispered by Serafina's disembodied voice. She was found dead from a severe allergic reaction, her face swollen and blue. On the floor next to her was a beautifully crafted atomizer, lying beside a single rare orchid, the one flower in the world she was deathly allergic to. Serafina knew their secrets, and she knew their weaknesses. Corbin and Riley were always 2 steps behind. By the time they reached a scene, it was already being sterilized by the maze's automated systems. Their investigation was a frantic race against an invisible, all-powerful janitor. Frustrated, Corbin turned his attention from the how to the why. "Forget the evidence for a minute, Riley," he said, pulling her aside into a small, temporarily stable alcove. "Let's focus on the host, Serafina Blackwood. What do we know?" While the storm cut them off from the outside world, Riley had a saving grace. A satellite-linked tablet with a heavily encrypted, firewalled connection to police databases. The signal was weak and intermittent, but it was a lifeline. "Not much," she said, her fingers flying across the screen. "She's a ghost. Born 28 years ago. Parents were Marcus and Isabella Blackwood. They died when she was 8. A fire at their winter estate. Officially ruled an accident caused by faulty wiring. No official is ever that certain," Corbin grunted. "Dig deeper." What was happening with Blackwood Industries at the time? Riley's eyes widened as she scrolled through archived financial news from 2 decades ago. Oh my God! Marcus Blackwood was about to blow the whistle on a massive price-fixing cartel. He claimed a group of his competitors and their financial backers were colluding to bankrupt smaller companies. He was scheduled to testify before a congressional committee. "Let me guess who was on that committee," Corbin said, a grim certainty dawning on him. Riley typed furiously. "Senator Alastair Finch." She kept digging. "And the companies involved. Vance Industries was one. The pharmaceutical giant headed by our other guest, CEO Carlyle. The venture capital firm that financed the hostile takeover. Run by our friend over there. They're all connected." The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a random selection of the rich and powerful. It was a curated list of everyone involved in the conspiracy that had likely led to her parents' murders and the subsequent cover-up. The accidental fire that had orphaned Serafina. "Julian Croft, the artist?" Corbin asked. "His father was the lead investigator on the fire," Riley said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was the one who ruled it an accident. Reports say he was deep in gambling debt at the time and came into a mysterious windfall shortly after closing the case. And Beatrice, the columnist? She was a junior reporter back then. She wrote a series of scathing, unsubstantiated articles smearing Marcus Blackwood's name just before his testimony, painting him as an unstable eccentric. It destroyed his credibility. It was perfect. Horribly, terrifyingly perfect. Serafina had spent 20 years in isolation, not just nursing a grievance, but building a monument to it. The Elysian Labyrinth wasn't a puzzle box. It was a slaughterhouse, designed to deliver a very specific, theatrical form of justice. This realization brought a new, chilling clarity, but it didn't make their situation any less perilous. The maze continued its relentless, quiet assault. The remaining guests were now skittish animals, jumping at every shadow, their own reflections suddenly appearing as menacing strangers. The constant, shifting architecture was taking its toll, inducing a powerful sense of vertigo and paranoia. Corbin knew their only chance was to get out of the maze's main paths and find its brain. He remembered the service corridor they had used to enter. The system has to have a central hub, he reasoned with Riley. Power, plumbing, the mechanisms that move the walls. If she's not in the maze with them, she's in its heart. It was Riley's tech-savvy mind that found the break they needed. While analyzing the maze's weak Wi-Fi signal, she noticed a repeating, encrypted data burst that was far stronger than the ambient signal. It was a command signal and it was localized. "It's like a nerve impulse," she explained, her tablet showing a fluctuating energy wave. "It's coming from beneath us. And there are blind spots in the surveillance system. Not many, and they keep moving as the maze reconfigures. But if we can get to one." They found one in a section of the labyrinth designed to mimic a forest, with tall, slender pillars of green-tinted glass acting as trees. For a 90-second window, a small area near the base of one of the trees was shielded from the cameras. It was their chance. Corbin examined the floor panels. They looked seamless, but his old-fashioned detective's eye caught a faint scuff mark, a sign of repeated use. Prying it with his pocket knife, he found a recessed electronic latch. Riley quickly hotwired it with a device from her kit. With a hiss of hydraulics, the panel lifted, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. As they descended, the air grew colder, and the faint hum of machinery became a deep, resonant thrum. They were in the guts of the beast. This was a world of exposed conduits, hydraulic pistons, and massive gears, all moving with a quiet, relentless precision. Walkways of steel mesh crisscrossed over a dark abyss. And through it all, they could see the maze above them, a ceiling of thick, translucent glass, with the distorted figures of the remaining guests walking unknowingly over their heads. And then they saw her, or rather, her reflection. In a polished service conduit, Corbin saw a flicker of movement. He pulled Riley into the shadow of a large piston. Peering around the edge, he saw a figure, cloaked in the same shimmering silver as Serafina's gown, moving silently along a lower walkway. She was inside the walls. She wasn't just watching from a control room. She was a predator, moving through the hidden passages of her own hunting ground, a ghost in her own machine. As the figure passed, Corbin noticed something that made the hair on his arms stand up. The figure moved with a lithe, athletic grace, but it seemed bigger, broader in the shoulders than the willowy heiress he had seen in the reception hall. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Before he could process it, an alarm, soft but insistent, began to chime. A red light flashed on a nearby control panel. They had been detected. Above them, the ceiling panels began to change. The glass frosted over, becoming opaque. The lights in the maze above flickered and died, plunging the guests into absolute darkness. And then, Serafina's voice, no longer calm and melodic but sharp and commanding, echoed through the service tunnels. The game master is displeased with off-board players. The labyrinth is now entering its final phase. A reset protocol has been initiated. Find the center, or be erased with the board. Corbin and Riley looked at each other, the grim understanding passing between them. The maze wasn't just a shifting puzzle anymore. It was a self-destructing trap. The heiress had been unmasked not as a remote observer, but as a hands-on killer. And now they were no longer just detectives investigating a crime. They were the final pieces in her deadly endgame. Reset protocol? What the hell does that mean? Riley's voice was tight with controlled panic, the red emergency lights of the service tunnels flashing across her face. It means we're out of time, Corbin said, his gaze fixed on the opaque glass ceiling above. He could hear the terrified, muffled shouts of the remaining guests now trapped in total darkness. She's collapsing the board. Whatever the center is, it's the only safe place left. Serafina's voice echoed again, this time with a new, urgent cadence, like a countdown clock given human form. The outer sections of the labyrinth are now retracting, a simple matter of engineering. The walls will slowly, gracefully, slide inward, a beautifully elegant compression. You have 1 hour to reach the heart. The game must have a conclusion. The deep thrumming of the machinery around them intensified. A low, grinding sound began. The vibration felt through the steel mesh of the walkway. The maze was closing in on itself. We have to get back up there, Corbin decided instantly. We can't help them from down here. He looked at Riley. That figure we saw. Something was wrong. Stay sharp. They raced back through the mechanical underworld, the sounds of the contracting labyrinth growing louder with every step. They found a maintenance ladder that led up to a floor grate. Pushing it open, they emerged into a different section of the maze, one they hadn't seen before. The air was thick with tension. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the intermittent flashes of lightning from the storm outside, which illuminated the terrified faces of the few remaining survivors. Senator Finch, Eleanor Vance, and the pharmaceutical CEO, Carlyle. They were scrabbling at the smooth, seamless walls, their composure utterly shattered. It's the police, Carlyle shrieked, his voice cracking. Do something. The walls are moving. Corbin could feel it now, a subtle pressure in the air, a faint scraping sound that was getting louder. Panicking won't help. We move to the center. Now. Navigating the maze in the dark was a new kind of hell. They had to rely on memory and touch, their hands sliding along the cold, unyielding glass. But the maze's layout was still shifting, even as it compressed. A corridor they remembered would now be a dead end. The floor would subtly tilt, throwing them off balance. It was a masterclass in disorientation. It was Riley who became their guide. She shielded her tablet from the ambient moisture, its screen the only steady source of light. The encrypted signal she had tracked earlier was now a screaming, singular beacon. It's a homing signal, she shouted over the groaning of the structure. It's coming from the absolute center of the complex. If we follow it, it will lead us there. They became a strange, desperate procession, a huddle of terrified elites led by 2 determined officers, all following the glow of a tablet through a collapsing world of glass. The journey was fraught with peril. Seraphina had saved her most ingenious traps for last. A section of floor suddenly gave way to a chute, and only Corbin's quick reflexes saved Senator Finch from sliding into whatever abyss lay below. A fine, soporific gas began to hiss from hidden vents, and they had to use scraps of their clothing as makeshift masks, their minds growing woozy. Throughout the ordeal, Seraphina's voice acted as a cruel narrator, revealing the final pieces of her motive. She projected images onto the frosted glass walls, ghostly tableaus visible only by lightning flash. They saw a picture of a happy family, Marcus, Isabella, and a little girl with bright, intelligent eyes. Then, images of the conspirators, Finch, Vance's father, Carlyle, all sharing a toast. Finally, a stark, grainy image of a burned-out house. "They called my father unstable," Seraphina's voice whispered, filled with a cold, 20-year-old rage. "They destroyed his name, then they destroyed his family, all to protect their web of greed. They hired an arsonist, a professional who knew how to make it look like an accident. And the investigator, the artist's father. He buried the evidence for a pittance to pay his gambling debts. You didn't just ruin the Blackwood name. You erased my world. I was 8 years old. I hid in a panic room my father had built, watching the monitors as my home, my life, burned to the ground. This labyrinth. This is my panic room. Now we all get to watch the world end together." The confession was met with horrified silence. The survivors now understood they were not victims of a madwoman's game, but subjects of a meticulously planned execution. As they neared the source of the signal, the grinding of the walls became a deafening roar. The passages were noticeably narrower. They were being funneled, herded toward the finale. They finally reached a large, circular set of chrome doors that slid open with a soft hiss as they approached. Stepping through, they found themselves in the heart of the labyrinth. It was a vast circular chamber. The floor was polished white marble, and the high, domed ceiling was a screen, currently showing a live feed of the raging storm outside. But the walls were the most captivating feature. They were made of two-way mirrors. From the inside, they were perfect, flawless mirrors, reflecting the occupants of the room into infinity. But from the outside, they were transparent. In the center of the chamber, surrounded by a ring of holographic monitors displaying every angle of the collapsing maze, stood the architect of their nightmare, a figure in a silver gown and a stoic, emotionless mask. But Corbin's eyes, now accustomed to the details, saw the truth. He saw the width of the shoulders beneath the gown, the slight bulk in the arms, the way the figure stood with a grounded, masculine stance. The doubt that had been planted in the service tunnels bloomed into certainty. "The game is over, Seraphina," Corbin said, his voice steady, his hand resting on the grip of his service weapon. The masked figure applauded softly, a slow, deliberate clap that echoed in the vast chamber. "Detective Corbin, you play the game so very well. You solved the maze. But you have misunderstood the final puzzle." The voice that came from the figure's helmet speaker was Seraphina's, the same melodic, chilling tone. But it was synthesized. It was a recording. "Take off the mask," Corbin commanded. The figure reached up and slowly, dramatically, removed the silver mask. The face beneath was not a woman's. It was a man, severe and gaunt, with cold, fanatic eyes and a shaved head. But the resemblance was unmistakable. He had Seraphina's eyes. "Who are you?" Riley breathed, her own weapon now trained on him. "I am the game master," the man said, his real voice a low, gravelly baritone. "My name is Gideon. I was her tutor, her protector, her only friend." Finch, Vance, and Carlyle stared, their minds unable to process this final twist. "Where is she? Where is Seraphina?" Vance demanded. Gideon smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "She has been with you this entire time. She has been the voice in your ears, the walls that confine you, the traps that ensnare you. The Elysian labyrinth is Seraphina. This is her mind given form, her pain made manifest in glass and steel." He gestured to the monitors. She designed every gear, every circuit, every psychological torment. My role was merely to be the stage manager, the hand that carries out the will of the artist. Corbin remembered the willowy figure from the reception. The woman who greeted us. A projection, Gideon stated simply. A sophisticated hologram. The technology has been in the family for decades. Serafina is a genius, detective. But the fire, it did more than leave her an orphan. The smoke inhalation, the trauma, it left her physically crippled. She has been bound to a life support system in the estate's medical wing for 20 years. She cannot walk. She cannot speak. But her mind is sharper than any blade. The truth was more monstrous than they could have imagined. A brilliant, broken mind, trapped in a failing body, had spent 2 decades constructing this perfect, elaborate revenge, with her fanatically loyal servant as her proxy. The game is over, Corbin repeated, taking a step forward. It's time to turn it off. Oh, the game is most certainly over, Gideon sneered, his hand moving to a large, red button on the central console. But you have it backward. This chamber is not the safe zone. It is the kill box. The heart of the maze is also its furnace. In 30 seconds, this room will be superheated to 500 degrees. A reset for the board and everyone on it. Poetic, don't you think? A cleansing by fire, just as they did to her family. The chrome doors behind them slid shut and locked with a heavy thud. The final confrontation was not the psychological battle Corbin had anticipated. It was a brutal, desperate fight. Gideon was not just a tutor. He was a trained combatant, moving with a deadly efficiency. He lunged for the console and Corbin intercepted him. The room became a kaleidoscope of violent reflections as the 2 men grappled across the marble floor. Riley, seeing her shot was not clear, turned her attention to the console. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface, searching for an override, a shutdown command, anything to stop the countdown that was now flashing on the main screen. 20 seconds. Finch and the others could only watch in terror, their own reflections showing their pathetic, cowering forms from 1,000 angles. Eleanor Vance, in a final, desperate act of self-preservation, picked up a heavy chrome stool and brought it down on Gideon's back as he struggled with Corbin. The blow staggered him, giving Corbin the opening he needed. He subdued Gideon, cuffing him securely. "Riley now," he yelled. "I can't stop the heating sequence," she shouted back, her voice strained. "But I think I can override the doors." 10 seconds. The ceiling above them began to glow a faint orange. The air in the room grew noticeably warmer. The countdown reached 5, 4, 3. "Got it!" Riley screamed. With a grinding screech, the chrome doors unlocked and slid open just as a wave of intense, shimmering heat began to pour from the ceiling vents. They scrambled out, dragging the terrified survivors with them, just as the chamber behind them became an inferno. They slammed the doors shut, sealing Gideon inside with his queen's final, fiery judgment. As they stumbled back into the now static maze corridors, the grinding of the walls ceased. The reset protocol had been halted. And then, another sound reached them, the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades. The storm had broken. Help had arrived. The aftermath was a surreal tableau. Traumatized billionaires were led from a glass labyrinth by weary police officers, blinking in the unfamiliar light of dawn. The monumental task of processing the most bizarre and elaborate crime scene in modern history began. Corbin's final duty was to visit the main house. In a sterile, white medical wing attended by silent, automated machines, he found her. Serafina Blackwood. She was impossibly frail, connected by a web of wires and tubes to a system that kept her alive. Her eyes were open, and they were the same bright, intelligent eyes from the photograph. They followed Corbin as he entered the room. A monitor beside her bed displayed a single, typed sentence. "Did I create a perfect system?" Corbin looked at the woman-child, the ghost who had built a hell out of her own pain. He thought of the lives lost, the terror, the sheer, brilliant madness of it all. He looked back at her unblinking, intelligent eyes, a mind trapped in a prison of flesh, just as her victims had been trapped in a prison of glass. "No," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the night. "You just built a better cage." Her eyes did not change, but on the monitor, a new line of text appeared. "A pity." Leaving the house, Corbin paused and looked back at the Elysian labyrinth one last time. It stood silent and magnificent in the morning sun, its glass walls glittering, holding within them the faint, crimson-stained reflections of the horrors that had transpired. From the outside, it was a masterpiece, a work of unparalleled art. But he knew the truth. It was a tombstone, a monument not to genius, but to a grief so profound it had shattered reality itself. And he knew its chilling, silent beauty would haunt him for the rest of his days.